everyone and welcome. The topic that we will be trying to understand and deliberate upon today is a very significant one. Women's movement in a global perspective. As we begin the lecture, I'd like to introduce everyone about myself. I'm Dr. Amna. I teach political science at the SPM College, University of Delhi. The lecture, as we take forward and deliberate on this topic, women's movement in a global perspective, we will be breaking our learning into three broad parts. In the first part, we will be trying to understand what is a social movement. How do we define a social movement? What is the typology of a social movement? And from that base, we will be trying to situate women in the paraphernalia of social movements. This discussion will make us understand that women voices, efforts for change have been diverse, yet somewhere amidst this diversity there has been a ray of united thought. We will find women voices in the realm of nation building. We will find women efforts in the realm of stakes on claims of state, of development, globalized world, amongst others. So from herein, let us begin our discussion. Now, when we say social movements and when we try to understand social movements, the very first idea that comes forward our mind is who organizes them? What is that they are trying to achieve? Social movements are defined as organized groups working to achieve a common aim. Now, creating change, resisting change, providing a voice to those otherwise marginalized are the core values of what it really means to define a social change. Now, social movements have been wide. Social movements have been diverse. So, when we try to understand social movement, we have to see that this attempt by organized groups in order to strive for a common cause are the core values. From therein, we try to understand the various types of social movements. And to understand the types of social movements, it is essential to relate it to the theories that make us understand causes of social movements. Deprivation. When people in a society feel that they are deprived of good, service, resource, of course they have a common grievance to come together. Resources. When people have certain grievances, they resort to mobilize resources, people, namely social status, knowledge of media and the political elites to throw light on the grievances through which they are going through. Political process impact. It is essential to see that social movements are an avenue of availability of political opportunities and other related political conditions also of the various people and agencies involved therein. The structural strain. It focuses on how social movements need factors to grow, and that we have seen deprivation, recognition that problem exists, ideology as a solution for those problems, events happen that lead social movements, and how society is open to change for the movement to be effective, mobilization of resources amongst others. Now, when we look at the broad outlining and a definition of social movements, there has been a fourfold classification. Arbel has put it forward: redemptive, reformative, revolutionary, alternative. Once again, redemptive, revolutionary, alternative, reformative. Now, this fourfold classification was based on how much change any movement is advocating. You know, the concepts in the realm of public discourse are contested. They change and evolve over time. So, similarly, other categories like old and new have been used. You know, traditional social movement theories focused on aspects of exploitation of one class by another. Whereas when we try to understand new social movements and theories thereof, they have been growing within an ideological context and plank of individual rights over the state's rights, claims of citizens. They focus on new aspects of collective identity, ethnicity, gender, to explain and understand the causal factors for collective action. Now, from herein, we will try to get into the realm of women's movement. But before we actually understand women's movement, very essential to understand what makes women have claim on certain narratives of the polity, of the economy and society. Herein, Simone de Beauvoir's work, The Second Sex, it was a historical account of women's disadvantaged position. It challenged the public and the private dichotomy and the perspective of women as the other. Herein we have to see that no doubt naturally, biologically, a man and a woman are different. But this natural differentiation cannot be used as a social construct in order to give women a secondary status. So, biology, the way it has been used to somewhere marginalize women, has been the forefront of several feminist voices, and women across the world have used this main idea to raise voice in terms of how society, polity, economy has treated man and women. Now, when we try to understand these ideas of Simone de Beauvoir, from therein comes the first idea of assumption of women's movement. And this challenging of patriarchy has been used by women to debate, to understand things at both levels. Now, taking a view from this, feminist scholars and activists have argued that women have engaged with public discourse for several years. However, literature, politics, contemporary reality fails to take into account of this dialogue, has failed to reflect on this exclusion and discrimination between a man and a woman. You know, women movement has evolved. It has witnessed change in its demands, it has witnessed change in its methods, and it has witnessed change in the context within which women would like to situate themselves. The first wave of feminist protest movement drew attention towards the voting rights. Political participation was the first call for women in terms of their movement. Following which, the second wave of feminist movement with time addressed new concerns. It addressed economic and educational aspects. With time, the awareness of women's subjugation and marginality drew similarity and common causes with other issues also. And this accounts for what makes women movement much more diverse and wide today. There have been attempts by feminist forces, as seen with the changes in terms of demands and vision with time, that not merely political participation could reform their plight. Today, women have been requesting at international forums too. At the level of United Nations, women activities are now drawing common alliances and global networks, which have indeed led to new developments in the realm of women movement. To talk about how 1985 at the Kenya conference, it was decided to declare it as the UN Decade for Women. The Women Conference in Mexico in 1975, in Copenhagen in 1980. All this comes to us to show that feminist analysis is of course influenced by many factors: class, structural analysis, racism, amongst others. And what is essential to see is the cross-cultural, cross-national development of solidarity. For example, women from the developed America, Europe coming together to speak for concerns of women who may not be from their realm. However, there are remarks that, just like any discourse is not complete within itself, there are certain follies. So similarly, women in the rural segment, the poor strata, the South do feel neglected. The period after 1980 saw that the issues of Third World and Global South were being integrated and given primacy as an alternative discourse in the debate on women issues. So namely, what we see here is that what liberal feminist movement started with, namely claims of a women on the political representation, this has underwent a change with the issues of complex and contested realm drawing similarity and common analogy with gender discrimination, and this is being brought to light. Therefore, what we are seeing here is that women movement, when you're trying to situate it in a global perspective, it has underwent change around the world. Issues of health, economics, ecology, violence against women, amongst others, too have integrated in the women's struggle realm. Now, it is very essential to understand that how do women claim the contested realm of state formation. Carol Bateman's work, This Sexual Contract, gives a powerful reinterpretation and critique of the social contract theory and argues against the concealed patriarchy that within the myth of an idealized social contract as described by social contract theorists like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and this questioning of the fundamental contract throws light on the relationship of a man with respect to a woman in the newly formed state after the social contract. It is also essential to understand the problematizing of the social contract discourse that were women consented to be a part of the patriarchy that shall unfold after the formation of a state following the social contract. While understanding this argument, one must also take into account that just like any other social movement idea, defining and understanding women's social movement is problematic too, as it cannot be, especially in the contemporary time, cannot be limited to a single value, norm, goal or ideas. If we look at the feminist movement, there has been huge overlapping trajectory wherein No doubt women have had a leap in the terms of their demands, coming from the exclusionary tenor of liberal democratic practices to claims of gender disparity in the nation and its polity in its freedom struggle. Now, where do we hear women voices? This is where exactly will be the next focus of our discourse. We try to understand that how women across the world have had witnessed a wide leap. Nation states, we all know that they have been formed by the ideas of enlightenment. They have an intrinsic Western touch to them, which has often been criticized by certain feminist scholars as leading to contradictions of concealing gender differences. Scholars have pointed out that does authority that flows after a long fought freedom struggle, what are the grounds of legitimacy of an inclusive voice for all that authority represents? So therefore, we have seen that women, have actively taken part in the nationalist freedom struggle. And with time, this attempt by women to take part in the freedom struggle has been debated. Accounts of historians, the Sri Lankan historian Kumari Jayawardena, tells us that how women across the third world somewhere have seen her. Kumari Jayawardana's work, it gives us glimpses of teleology of women's protests as seen in nations like, comparatively if we see, India, Sri Lanka, Egypt, Indonesia, amongst others. Therefore, what we see here is that feminism and the movement thereof comes centralized around the idea that is awareness of a women's oppression, and a common theme that binds all humans into action to register their voice against oppression, exploitation, domination at work. And today, domination is not just being seen at the level of polity. Today, new claims are being made on women equal status within a family, at a workplace, our society. And all these, there are scholars who are working on it to clearly register women's voices in all respects and account. So as we try to understand that how feminist scholars have seen that education has been an important weapon used by women to register their protests and put in an attempt for reform. When we try to look at in the Indian scenario, way before anyone, Pandita Ramabai had the quest to use education and use it as a guiding light to fight patriarchy and challenge the injustices of society. Even at the global level, others like Raden Arjeng in Indonesia took forward the cause of education of girls, being a pioneer for education of girls, and not only fought for the voting rights, but also economic and educational empowerment too. Now, women's movement have demonstrated that gendered outlook, gendered insight are evident in approach and policies that are concerning the nation, the society, the economy. This is why in national histories too, women as a field of inquiry have been neglected, and this has been registered with protests. In 1980s, the subaltern studies using the post-colonial approach drew on the fact that history was constructed in a process, in a context that was influenced by certain interests and conditions prevailing. Their debate on historiography by opposing the nationalistic account of history and attempting to expand the area of inquiry akin to what can be called as history from below. These studies often draw on how lives of women are affected by women participation in the national movement and the neglect of their issues after the attainment of freedom. Let's try to understand, when you look at the historic women's struggle, the suffragette movement. In the historic Seneca Fall Women's Rights Convention, women activists pioneered the cause of changing the law of the land to enfranchise women, which over a period of time, realizing the importance of women's rights, became a massive movement. Now, once this movement becomes a massive movement, with the efforts of organizations like National American Women's Suffragette Association to undertake campaigns at a sustained level and work out mechanisms to work with power authority. All this is really worthy of attention and further deliberation to understand the modalities of how women movement operated. History tells us that there was another group which was much more radical in approach, National Women's Party, which also undertook huge efforts to ensure women amendment. However, there are issues in every movement, and suffrage movement too was also not immune from it. All this goes us to show that sustaining and building a social movement has its own challenges, and women movements, as seen in a global perspective, be it the suffrage movement or be it women in nationalist freedom struggle discourse, has had its own challenges and opportunities. So therefore, within this movement also, there was debate on the extent of change needed, the crucial issue of differences of opinion with respect to states' rights, amongst others. Nationalism, involves a sense of unity and pride for common identity, owing allegiance to a larger entity of nation. What is significant to note that amidst the process of mobilization in drawing this awareness, women who have raised their voices also witness a clash between gendered social construction of reality and the duties towards the nation, which often later then get concealed because of gender disparity. Even today, these concepts are being re-invoked, re-debated for any discourse on the study of nationalism and national movements across the globe. So therefore, what we see that amidst the contradictory realms, there are certain similar questions to reflect on. Does the state give equal rights to men and women? What was the status and role played by women in the national movement? What was the degree of tension between the traditional and the new roles the women had to play? There are various examples drawing from nation across, underlying the importance of the idea that respect for national freedom was a unifying motive for women in national struggles. Women have often felt oppressed after the aftermath of the liberation struggle, where women's voices were sidelined or silenced after the freedom struggle was over. Doubts have been raised for efficiency of women struggle being led by bourgeois nationalistic movement. So therefore, all these get on to tell us that how women movement over a period of time have witnessed diverse yet similar claims. Even when you look at the narrative from the other side of the globe, that is when we try to situate it from the Eastern perspective. Within the Eastern perspective, there have been Burmese women who took part in the freedom struggle and yet received no efforts, no recognition for the efforts they played. Now let's understand the contemporary saga of women's movement. Now, if one tries to understand the typology within which women movements, especially in a global perspective, exist, their attempts and networks have registered an increase at various levels of agency, of association, of issues concerning women coming from diverse forums too. Today, questions are being raised about the visibility of issues of women in global affairs and politics. Adjacent questions are being asked that who are the players, what is their relationship with other social movement, what is the impact on global women issues and movement thereof. There is no clear-cut outline of or trajectory of women's movement when situated from a global perspective. Feminists have argued with Marxist perspective too that does historical materialism or sheer focus on historical materialism do away with the fact how it conceals women disparity? Today, women groups have taken common causes with issues like domestic violence, equal pay, harassment under the wider umbrella of women movement. Today, racism is drawing common causes with gender inequality too. So what you can see here is that women's activism is existing alongside other global issues too, because a sad reality of the global world is that what is global is connected to the local, and what is local has linked to the globe. So therefore, women's movement and women perspective is definitely not isolated from this trend, and women movement across the globe are raising important questions. What is the significance of a social movement in a democracy? How social movement offer alternatives for the public discourse? How is the exclusion of gender that leads to more problems for policy making and analysis? So therefore, there has been constant challenging of the narrative for any social movement, and women movement too has witnessed it either from the new voices or from counter narratives being set by the Asian, the African, the disabilities women's amongst others. So what you see here is amidst the wide ambit, there has been questioning the ignorance and exclusion. Further, what is essential is to be seen that in the present time, the agenda has been made multidisciplinary by drawing from sociology, history, economics, wherein their actions have led to changes in relations with the state structures too. There have been numerous cases in order to make us understand that how today women have been putting forward efforts to ensure that right from challenging authoritarianism or to putting stakes on the gender nature of human interface with environment, or to talk about gendered interface with capitalism. Amidst all this, we say that the subject of analysis is often fragmented, comprised of multiple layers under which one adds the complexity of studying women activism. So what you see here is that grassroots activism from the Latin to the American to the Asian, there has been a challenge to women issues. So therefore, dear listeners, when we try to conclude our discussion on women's movement in global perspective, we have to see that women movement activism over a period of time has become much more vibrant, from claiming political representation to being a proactive critique of the Western development paradigm. Today, women voices are pervasive. It is being argued that as development leads to destruction of forests and ecology, women too draw similar common clause with it, talking about how this development has had a masculine overtone of domination where earth suffered. Similarly, with respect to development and environment, today women protests are being seen from population aspect, from registering new protests at world forums. So therefore, today women activism has drawn common causes, and the idea of modus of working of women has indeed witnessed a wide realm. Today, feminists stand up for the need to speak up as global forces against free market capitalism, against gendered nature of a harming environment, which too affect the lives of women. So herein we are trying to conclude our discussion on women's movement in a global perspective. Right from understanding the working of a social movement to understanding that how today the state is not the only actor, and wherein amongst this there have been new claims on the working of power and authority. Women as a collective have raised diverse yet interrelated voice to register voices against gendered construction of reality, against patriarchy, against policies and actions that lead to more prevalence for man over women, against avenues wherein there has been no effective participation. Future will be shaped by due political engagement and drawing from the best of past and present practices for women movement too. So dear listeners, dear learners, as we see that no human activity can be predicted accurately. Discourses within the realm of public are always contested. So here this idea also applies when we try to study women's movement in a global perspective. But always remember, the voices to register claims to raise issues with patriarchy, with unequal representation of women, against discrimination of women at family, at home, at workplaces, at the realm of environment, of unhealthy practices of capitalism have been going on. The quest for equality is never one way. The struggle always goes with time, and women's movement too is a torchbearer of this idea. We hope you all enjoyed the learning of the topic women's movement in a global perspective. So this is all for today, and we hope that you have great learning ahead with other lectures to flow. Thank you.